Hey everybody, welcome to DJ Tutorials. This tutorial is going to be on rendering jewelry using LuxCore render and basically going through what kind of materials to put on, how to do dispersion effects and lighting, all that stuff. If you haven't yet, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. That really helps me out. And if you end up getting lost or you just want to converse with other artists, jump onto the Discord. There's a link in the video description below. And if you feel like donating to cover some of the cost of creating these videos, you can feel free to click on the link in the description below to become a patron. And if you go there, you'll be able to see the different tiers and what you'll get from becoming a patron. So we're going to jump into Blender here and we're going to start pretty much from scratch, except for I have deleted everything from a new session, including the camera and the light, all that stuff, because we're going to start from scratch. But you can see here that I already have two rings. And if you are a avid watcher of the channel, you will notice this from the more recent video where I cover how to model this channel set of rings. So if you haven't done that yet and you want to be able to create your own, you can jump on there, do that tutorial, and then head into this one. And this isn't a fresh tutorial on how to install LuxCore. You can take a look at my other videos on how to do that. So let's go ahead and we're going to go over here to the render settings. We're going to change this to LuxCore. And first, what we're going to tackle is just the overall sort of materials that are going to be applied for the metal of the ring and for the diamonds themselves. Now, I'm not going to be going into how to make rubies and emeralds and stuff like that, because that's really just changing the coloring of the glass. Usually what people have a problem with is the dispersion effects inside of the engine and how to change some things in there. So let's go ahead and we're just going to grab this one here. And basically all I did to create this larger one, I just went in here and I took the edges here and scaled them up a bit to make this one a little bit more of a masculine sort of ring, so it's a bit thicker. So before we start actually changing the materials, what we want to do is we need to change the overall sizing of our scene here. So if we go into the scene properties and we go into units, you can see that it's using the metric system and all this sort of stuff down here, and the length is in meters. Now, if I hit 1 to go to the front view, because this is where I've set up the side here, and I go over to our measuring stick here, and I go across, you can see that this is 2.25 meters right now, which is a huge ring. That is not a realistic size of the ring. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, change this to centimeters. And I know that the ring size that I am going for, as far as a female chart that I found for ring sizes, I'm going to do about 10 centimeters, but it's really up to you. You can find those charts online if you'd like. But basically, we're going to go over here to where it says unit scale. I'm going to hold shift, left click, and drag. And we're going to drag that over until this is around 10 centimeters. Now, I could have scaled it down inside of the other scene, but this is a much easier and quicker way to do that scaling for the units in the scene. And this, as far as I understand, it really helps out when you're rendering out glass and other sorts of volume materials, because it takes into account the scene size and the sizing of your other objects or just your objects in the scene. So when we start on our materials, we're going to select or at least I'm going to start on the big one here. Select the big one, hit /, and I'm going to just save this before we start. And we're going to basically start creating a metal material here. So if we go to the rendered view here, you can see that there's just a basic material, and we have this sort of background here, which is kind of blah. So we can use this to start to create our material, but really my recommendation is that you go over here and you choose an HDRI to do this. So change this over here to HDRI, and we're going to go down to open. And I have a bunch of stuff downloaded from HDRIhaven.com. They're free. You can jump onto that website and download the exact same as I'm going to download, or whatever you think is going to work for you. So we're going to start with this Studio Small 4 right here. Open that up. And now we have a more realistic sort of background that we can use to render out our material. And especially with metals, you do want something like this because reflections will take into account everything that's around it. So it's very important that you have at least something that's a little bit realistic. So let's split the panel here. And I'll just go to solid mode to do this. Let's split the panel over here. And we're going to change this to the LuxCore material nodes and get rid of this over here. And let's just look at it right over here like this. Now, before you start, my recommendation is that you go down here to your viewport render, turn off the denoiser because that makes it easier, and change this to your GPU. If you have an NVIDIA GPU, I would recommend doing this. AMD GPUs with OpenCL, there's a little bit of an issue with rendering. In general, sometimes I don't know if they've resolved those, but just keep that in mind if you do end up with some crashing and stuff. Just change this to CPU and only use your CPU to render if you run into OpenCL render issues. So let's change this to render. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And over here, if you click on the material properties, we can just start with a metal material just like this. And that's going to put a generic metal material. And it often will look pretty good to begin with, but we're going to do some things to just make this look a little bit better. So first of all, one of the better ways to render out metals with the coloring is what's called a Fresnel texture. And this engine has this sort of preset where you can choose from this list here. If you choose gold, it will look like this, which to me, I don't really find that to be a realistic gold, but I'm going to trust the developers that this is supposed to be accurate. You can change this to silver to have a silver type of ring, and aluminum and amorphous carbon. So there's all these different settings here. Now I'm going to go for a white gold sort of look here. And normally I would say just go to color and pick a different color, like maybe a little bit yellowish, because white gold does tend to have a little yellowish tint to it. But I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. So we're going to change this back to Fresnel texture. And instead of this preset here, I'm going to go to custom NK values. Now, basically what we're going to do here is we're going to choose some colors that we want. So I'm going to move these all the way up to white. And you can see that this is the sort of look that we're getting here. And what I actually like to do is I'm going to change this to a little bit of and if I hold shift, I can actually left click and drag this down a little bit and make that a little bit more yellowish. And you can actually change the color pretty greatly by doing this. So you can see I have this bluish looking color, and you can have a red looking color that looks really, really neat. But instead, I'm going to just pick a color that is a little bit more on that white and yellowish gold. So it's a very slight difference in how that is actually showing up here. These are two different colors. It's kind of hard to see, I know, with the YouTube compression, but those are two different colors, and you can change the type of material by doing that there. Now, the other thing here is the roughness value. We actually want this to be a little bit more smooth. So you can see that that gets quite dark, but when you see the reflections here, it does change the overall quality of how that's looking. And part of the problem here is that our background, this is a little bit dark for the scene, but you'll see that as we start to build things out, it does actually look pretty good. If you wanted to, you could change the HDRI to something a little bit brighter. It's completely up to you, but I'm going to go forward just using this. So if we go over here, metal material, and change it back to color, you can see that you have a very different way of rendering this by changing it to Fresnel or color. So do your best there to match your reference material and get the sort of material that you want. I'm just going to use the Fresnel texture because I know that in the final rendering, this looks pretty good. Now, we're not done with this material, because if you look really, really close at a lot of reference material of gold, or if you do end up having a ring on you, there often are sort of micro displacements and little scratches and stuff like that. And if you want to have a more photorealistic image in the final, you want to sort of replicate that as you build out your scene and you apply your materials. So what we're going to do here, we're going to keep this right there like that, and I am going to add a texture, image texture. Now, can you use um, procedural textures to do this? Of course, but I like to do things very, very quick. I don't like to mess around too much with procedurals, because this is just how I like to do things. But it's really up to you on how you want to handle this. So what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to be using a texture that was in the AMD Radeon Pro texture materials library. You can check out my other tutorials on that to find where that is and how to link that to your images and everything. But really, this is up to you to sort of like find some materials online of scratches and things like that. You can go to texturehaven.com. They have a bunch of free stuff there. And basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here to open, and I have a saved location of all the AMD Pro Render materials. So they're all right here. And the one that I want is called, and I already know what it is, aluminum brushed. Let's see here. It's aluminum brushed metalness right here. So I'm going to use this. I'm going to open that up. And we can pipe this directly into the roughness, and you can see that it gets pretty crazy. So one of the reasons why is because this is actually not a unwrapped ring here, but we're going to use a method to basically unwrap it based on the object, a lot like you would do in cycles. So we're going to go over here and we're going to add a texture, or sorry, we're going to add under mapping here, we're going to go to triplanar mapping. Right like that. So the color's in there, and you're going to click this little add button right here. And what this does is it's going to actually take our material, and you can kind of see it right here. It's kind of faint, the material that's there. It's very sort of like very gray value. It's not very contrasty, the colors, and we can actually change how that's being contrasted. But you can kind of see it right there. And under the scale here, we're actually going to click this uniform button. And if you change this to a 0.1, it's going to stretch it out by a lot. So it's not really easy to see that texture. But if you change this to a, let's say 5, for example, it's going to repeat a lot more. And to make this a little bit more clear, we're going to add a color ramp right here. And I'm just going to click and drag and pull this over. And I'm going to click and drag and pull this over as well, just so that you can see that texture there. So hopefully you can see the texture, that wrinkly texture that's right there. With this color ramp here, what we can actually do is drive the roughness values of this particular texture that's going into our metal here. And I know that what I want to use, because I already have it saved, is I want to have this set to a 1. And then this value here, I'm going to paste in this value, which is 25, 25, 25. And then this value here, I'm going to pull this over. And this one is 0D, 0D, 0D. And I'm going to put this at a 0.38. So it's not super obvious. It's slightly there, and it's up to you on how you want to do this. You can change this here and pull this up if you want to make it a little bit more rough. It's up to you on what you want your material to look like. And if you have a sort of like brush surface or something like that, that's kind of what this is for, is to basically add that sort of uh, roughness material to get it kind of similar to what you're seeing in your reference material. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're also going to add a little bit of a bumpy texture to this besides just this roughness map that we're using. We could just use this, but I'm going to do something different. So we're going to go down here and I'm going to hit Shift A to add. We're going to go to texture, image, and I'm going to open up. If we go back to the maps here, we're going to look for stone marble gray. I'm just going to copy and paste it back in here, see if we can find it. There it is. So stone marble gray. So that's what we're going to use right there. And this is going to be a normal map. So we're going to click on normal map right here. And if we take this and we click and drag it and put it right into there, there isn't really a whole lot that's probably going to happen because, again, this isn't unwrapped properly. So there's no real UV coordinates for this to apply to. So what we need to do is we need to use a triplanar mapping system in order to get this to map over the top of the surface without doing the UV unwrap and all that. And what we need to do here is instead, if we go to Shift A to mapping, go down here, we want to use triplanar normal mapping like this. And you're going to take this where it says bump, and if you put it in here, there's a problem. Because you can see there, the color is this purple color. Change this back from normal map to make it normal, to make it not normal, I guess. So uncheck that box there. Then take this and plug it right back into there. And you can see that now there is a normal map being applied to the surface of our ring. And it makes it look a little bit more realistic because now there are some displacements in the actual, or at least what's observable to us. It looks like there's some micro displacements all along the surface of the ring, making it have this sort of faked geometry effect. Okay. And it's a little bit too much. So what we want to do is add a 3D mapping here. Click this uniform right here. And let's say we want this to be something like 7.5 so that it's very small, something like that there. And then you can change this height right here to a 0.05 or something like that to make it really slight. Or if you really want it to have a much stronger surface, you can make this a 0.1, whatever sort of fits the sort of overall look that you're trying to do with your ring here. I'm going to set this back to 0.05. And if you did want to add the anisotropic roughness, you can do that. You can add it right there, and you can make this look like it has that chrome or aluminum look to it by adding that anisotropy. But I'm going to take that off. Again, it's one of those things that really is up to you on what you're trying to do. I'm going to hit Control S to save, and then we're going to go back out to, or change this to solid mode, /, and I'm going to then link my material. So I want to click this. So click my other ring here, then click this ring here, Control L to link, and then we will link the materials. And if we look at the rendered view, you can see that now both rings have the exact same material, so that when you make your adjustments over here, it will apply to both of your materials. Now the next material that we're going to be applying here is we're going to be applying the jewel or diamond material. So let's hit / here after we select the diamonds, and you can go ahead and change the names up here. I probably should have done that, but I'm going to leave it as it is. And let's change this to the rendered view. And what we want to do is go over here and we want to change this to glass, which is going to make this material here. And LuxCore is, let's turn off the overlays right here so that it looks a little bit cleaner as we're observing this. And LuxCore really does a great job with rendering in general, so these already look pretty cool. The only problem is that we need to have a dispersion effect, and it's one of the things that LuxCore does very well right out of the gate when you want to start adding some dispersion inside of your glass objects. So what we need to do is start setting this material a little bit more according to realistic settings. So if we go here to IOR, the proper IOR, it should be somewhere around 2.415, but what's really cool is you can actually hit Shift A here, do a search for IOR, and there's an IOR preset. And you can click and drag that into the IOR here. The value, you can look for diamond, and there it is. Boom. So now we have a diamond IOR set, and we really didn't have to do a whole lot, and it's according to what this engine says are realistic expectations here. Now the other thing that we want to do is we want to add dispersion, and you might be tempted to just go ahead and throw a 1 in here. And you can see that there's a dispersion effect, but it's very dark. The gemstones become very, very dark. And if you hover over the top here, you can see here that it says dispersion strength, Kashi B coefficient, realistic values range from, and then it gives you some numbers, not supported by architectural and rough glass. So you cannot add a roughness and have this dispersion at the same time. But what's important there is that it gives you some basically numbers that gives you a range of what the dispersion should be. Now you may be wondering, well, how the heck do I figure that out? And what I did is I just did a quick Google search online for Kashi B coefficient of diamonds with LuxCore, and I was able to get a value which was 0.01170. And that should be more or less close to the realistic expectation. Now, there's probably going to be somebody there who says it's actually this, it's actually that. That's fine. You can figure out whatever is going to work for you. And in fact, when you're doing these renders, a lot of people in the like jewelry industry, they really like the sort of pushed realism of the dispersion effect. So if you wanted to change this and increase this or double it or whatever, that's really up to you on if you want to do that. But this is the more realistic expectation of what you would see in that dispersion effect. Now, one thing that's going to happen, and it's going to be more apparent when we do, or when you do your renders later. And this is why I'm bringing it up now, because you can leave this as it is and do the rest of your rendering and go to the end and see if this is a problem for you. But when we start to increase the amount of samples to really push the realism of this scene, and you start to add the other things inside of the scene for the rendering, what happens is these gemstones start to look very yellowish. And whether or not that's supposed to be accurate or true is, that's anybody's guess. I'm not really sure if that's supposed to happen. But if you do a render, most of the time people will be like, no, they look yellow and I hate that. You need to change that. And your client will be probably really irritated with you if you can't find a way to change the yellowing of the glass or the gemstones that are inside. And the best way that you can do that is by adding a constant color. So if we do a search here for constant, you'll see there's a constant color here. And if you bring this up and if you pick a color and you take that and you put it into the transmission and the reflection, you can see that you're now changing the coloring of those gemstones. And what you'll want to do if it's yellowing, so if it's more of like a yellowy look like this, you want to use the opposite value to negate that yellowing. So you'd want to go up here towards the blue. And you can see that I kind of went up here a little bit, and it's a little bit of like a very, very light sky blue. And if we take a look really closely here, it does look a little bluish. You can see how it looks a little bit bluish, hopefully. That might be a little bit too much for you, and the value that I've seen works really well is going to be this value here. So I will go here and paste that in. So F8FCFF worked pretty good when I did mine, and it's just slightly up off of the pure white scale there up into the blue area, which was able to neutralize or negate that yellowing effect. So you can leave this unplugged for now, but keep it there just in case you need to find a way to neutralize that yellowing effect. So we're going to go ahead and hit Control S to save, go to solid mode, front slash to go back out of the isolated mode there, and then we're going to apply the material to the other diamonds here. So let's select these diamonds here, then the ones that already have our material, Control L to link materials, and now both, if we go to rendered view, you will see that we now have diamonds set in both of our rings here, and they have the same materials. Let's go to solid mode and save. Now the next thing that we're going to do here is we're going to add a floor plane, and because we need these to be on something, you can't just have them floating in space unless that's a sort of look you're going for. And very simply, we're going to make a very, very simple floor. So Shift A to add, go to mesh, and we'll go to plane S10 just to scale it up a lot. Control A to apply the scale. So if we take a look at this, we want to make sure that the flooring is right there underneath the rings. So it looks like it's set right on top, so that's good. So if you need to adjust your ring placement or whatever, feel free to do that. But I just added it to the floor and it's looking good. And what we want to do here, if we go to the rendered view and just kind of take a look around here, most rings that I have seen rendered, they like to use a white surface or a black reflective surface. The black reflective surface can work, but you end up seeing a lot of the background. And with LuxCore, there's not a very easy way to change some of the reflectivity of the environment light and your rings. So we're going to make a white surface. And we're also going to have it be kind of like a fabric-y surface as well, because I do have a cool pattern that we can use to create a little bit of a micro displacement on the surface. You can choose to skip that part if you want, but let's basically add a nice sort of white surface to this. So let's go over here and we're going to add this right here. So it's going to be called Disney. And we should be naming our materials here. So I'm going to quickly do that. I'm going to call this floor. Okay. I'm going to click on this ring here, and I'm going to call this metal. And then the diamonds, I'm going to change this to diamond. So let's go back to the floor here, move this over, and let's zoom out over here on the right. So you can see that it already looks white. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a roughness to this. I'm going to go to about a 0.5 because what I want to do is have this be very, very diffuse so that the main point of focus is going to be directly on our rings here and not on the background. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift A, Texture, and we're going to go to Image. And we're going to open up a texture that I have from texturehaven.com, and you can go ahead and go to that. It's called Fabric Pattern 05, and there's a normal in there that looks like this. I'm going to open that up. We're going to use that as a normal and plug that right into the bump map. And if we zoom out, you can see like it looks pretty bad, but if you zoom way, way out, I don't know if you can see this, but it's basically like a fabric pattern that's going over the top here. And what we can do is that since a single plane is already UV unwrapped, just in Blender standard, you can go over here and click Add. And then here where it says UV Scale, you can change this to like a 100, and then that will make, if we zoom way in here, you can see that there is a fabric pattern that is on the bottom of our scene here, and it looks pretty cool. So let's change the height because it's a little bit strong. You can try a 0.1, and that might work out okay. It's up to you on what you really want to see when it comes to that particular pattern there. We're actually going to keep it pretty much like this. We don't want to get too crazy with adding a whole bunch of extra materials on things that people shouldn't really be focusing on. They should be focusing on our super cool ring design instead of the background. So at this point, what we'll want to do is we'll want to add our camera so we can start to see how this is really shaping up. So let's hit Shift A, go down to camera, and let's go to wireframe here so we can see what's going on. You can see it's looking pretty big there. I'm going to scale this down a little bit. Hit S to scale it down, and basically just resizes that. And we can go here, hit N, view, camera to view, and then when we hit 0, we can actually start to zoom out and get a nice view on our rings here. So something like, let's actually set this up more in the center and maybe zoom out a little bit like this. And let's go over here to our render settings right here, the output properties, not render settings, output properties. Render region, which is going to basically, when we render through our viewport, it's going to lock it to just this area. Go to the view for rendered view there, and here we have it. Now you may be wondering, let's actually hit N here, turn this off, the camera to view, so that when we zoom in, it's not as much of an issue. You may be wondering, okay, this is cool, but the diamonds are really flat. Like we can't really see them. It's kind of boring. And you're right. They are flat, they are boring. They're not really popping out of the scene like they should. And that's because we don't have scene lights in here basically to direct light into those to really make those shine. And I've played around with the lighting settings and lights in general inside of a lot of engines, and with rings, what you really want to do is you need to sort of set a light that goes up above it to hit it and sort of like bounce around in there. And you also need one or two more you need one from the camera and then another one sort of in the back behind your scene over here or behind your object over here to give it a little bit of a backlight. But you want to sort of control the sizing in a particular way to shine the diamonds kind of more specifically than just the scene in general. And that may or may not make sense to you, but let's just go around and let's make this anyway so that you can see how to do this, or at least how I would approach this. So let's hit Shift A here, go to light, and then we're going to start with an area light. And we're going to grab this on the Z, so GZ, move it up, scale it way the heck down. More like that there. Something maybe like that. And what we want to do is we want to create, I'm just going to go ahead and change this solid over here so you can see what I'm going to do without this updating so much. We're going to add an empty to point all of the lights into a specific direction so that when you move these around and you make changes, it's always directed at the same place or the same target. So Shift A over here, go to empty, plane with axes, and we're going to name this light target. And I'm just going to move this up on the Z and I'm going to scale it up so it's easier to see where it's at. We're going to click on our area light up here, go here to Object Constraints and Track 2. Click on the pipette and we're going to either select the target from here or you can select it up here in the tree. And now when we take this and we move it around, you can see that it's always going to be targeting that specific section. When you're doing your lighting, my preference is you go here to rendered, you're going to turn off your HDRI. So we're going to actually take this right here where it says gain. We're going to take this and make it 0. And you can see now what that lamp is doing or what this light source is doing. And if you've seen my caustics tutorial, you'll kind of understand that when you're building out these scenes with glass, you really need to pay attention to the size of your light, the power of your light. So if we go to the light settings here, the gain here is kind of like the power of the light source itself and the distance to the object. And one of the other things that you really need to pay attention to is the number of bounces that you're calculating for your scene. So if we go over to our render settings and we go to light paths, you can see here it's set pretty low. This is a low setting. And it's one of the reasons why we're not seeing a whole lot happening when we have this scene put together with our lights. So let's go to total path depth. We're going to put this up to a 25. And to make this a little bit quicker, let's change this to a regular shading here, the solid mode. Diffuse, we can do like an 8. Glossy, maybe a 12. And specular, maybe a 25. Or maybe you could do glossy and specular at a 25, because these are the areas that are going to affect this diamond part. So let's go back to rendered here. And you can see that even though we haven't done a whole lot different, there's at least some more calculations happening in our scene where we can see those diamonds a little bit easier. So let's go to a side view here, or a front view, just so that we can see where our light is. And what you want to do is you want to pull this down and get it a bit closer to the actual diamonds. And that is going to help with directing that light more at these diamonds here. And you can see that now we're seeing a lot more of that dispersion effect happening there. And if we take this and move it on the Y a little bit to kind of aim it a little bit more in the middle, and then we can take this and pop this up to maybe a 25. You can see that now we're getting a lot more lighting going on. And in the final, what I ended up doing here was setting this to a 125, something like that. Now what we can also do here is, instead of creating a brand new one of these lamps and doing all the stuff we already did, we can just hit Shift D, which will duplicate it. I'm going to move it over here. So I'm going to put it over here, kind of at the side of the camera a bit. This is going to be more of like a directional light rather than this sort of like overhead spot lamp sort of thing that we got going on here. I'm going to scale this up a bit. We're going to make this a little bit of a softer lamp, a little bit more like it's just a regular sort of directional lamp, like a key light or something like that, to just light up our scene. I'm going to change this here to a 5, just to make it a little bit softer, and maybe bring it up a little bit on the Z, pull it over a little bit, maybe something like this here. And then we'll add one more. I'm going to hit 7 to go to my top view, hit Shift D to duplicate and pull it over on this side, maybe over, whoops, G for grab, over here, like this. And you'll want to be careful because you can see there's the actual, you can see the panel where the lighting and the lit and the unlit areas are. You want to be careful with that. Unless you want to see that, you'll have to sort of make some changes on the location of where your lighting is. So I'm going to hit 3. Actually, let's hit 1 here. G, lock it on the Z, pull it down a bit. Let's go about there. And let's change this to a 35. Maybe something a little bit like that. And let's turn this off right here and just take a look at how this is shaping up. So yeah, this is starting to look pretty good. We got a lot more going on as far as the amount of shine that's going on in the diamonds. And we can go ahead and introduce back in the background lighting or the environment lighting to take a look and see how that's coming. We can zoom out a bit here and take a look. So yeah, this is looking pretty good. The only thing that I would say you need to be careful of are your hotspots in your scene. As far as the lighting that you have here, you see there's this super bright spot right here. So we might actually need to take this and change this orientation a little bit. Maybe pull it over here a bit, like this. Sort of reduce that a little bit there. And one of the other things that you might want to do is, if your scene in your background, if you want to sort of change the way that the HDRI is lighting the scene, and I'm just going to pull out of the camera view here, and you can see that here's our background behind us. You can, over here with the z-axis rotation, you can move this like 150 degrees or something if you want. So you can rotate that to get the lighting set a little bit closer to what you would like to see. I want to actually alter the amount that this light is, or the environment light is being exposed here, or the amount that the brightness, so to speak, because we really want to sort of show off the brightness in our ring here, and it's still a little bit dull. So you can change this to something like a 4 or a 6 or whatever you want. Let's actually change this to something like a 4.6 because that's what I ended up at on my last or on the example project. And you can see that that's starting to look all right as far as the ring is concerned, but the floor has gotten really, really, really bright. Okay. And that's fairly easy to change. If we go here to the materials, we can actually take the base color and pop this down to something like a black or a more dark color, and that will knock back some of that. And we can maybe pull down the exposure a little bit more, something like a 3.5. And adjust our lights. So I'm going to take a moment here to overall adjust my lights, adjust my environment setting, and adjust the ground to get it more or less exactly where I want it to be. And you'll need to do this on your own to get it set up exactly on how you want it to be for your particular scene. But take a moment and refine where your lights are placed. Get the most out of the shine on your diamonds here and the overall scene and the darkness on your ground plane. And I'm going to speed up the footage here so you can see what I do, but in a sped up manner. Okay, so this is going to be pretty much okay for now. One thing that you can do here, if you find that the ground plane is still like way too white for you or too bright, you can actually add, if we go here to Shift Add, we can add a material, matte, change this to a black diffuse color, add a mix right here, put these two together, and then you can basically use this mix factor to go between the two, this material and this material. And if you go all the way to one side, it will be completely black. All the way to another side, it will be this material here. But I'm going to put it on to like a 0.25 maybe, and you could take this bump, throw it in there. That way you have the same bump material applied to both, and you can then basically control this using this method here. And I'm going to probably just spin the HDRI a little bit differently just to see if I can adjust this sort of like hotter area over here. And I think that should be okay for the purposes of this tutorial. So take the time to experiment with different HDRIs and experiment with rotating this in different ways just so that you can see how those different settings will change how your overall scene is being rendered. So I'm going to save this, and now we're going to go to our render settings and get this ready for some render tests. Now, my recommendation for you is to go into the output properties here, click on crop to render region, click on your camera. Let's go to solid mode here, save, and we're going to take these little areas here, left click and drag just to select these specific sections right here, because this is where we really want to save time. Okay, you want to do some test rendering and just sample the area that's really important to you and in turn your client or whomever it is that you're trying to showcase this render. And if we go to the rendered view here, you can see that it's only rendering that section in the viewport. But also, when we set this up to render, if we go to solid mode here, render image, it's also only going to render that section. And we'll give it some time to let it run this render for a little while, and then we can sort of analyze it and see what we need to do from there. Okay, so this is at 600 samples. I'm going to hit escape just to stop the render. And if you can zoom in, it looks very pixelated and it doesn't really look super wonderful. And my recommendation for everybody is that when you're setting up for your final, we're going to go over here. We're going to change this to 200% because your final should always be double what your final image is going to be because you're going to squeeze it down afterwards. You're going to bring it into Photoshop or into GIMP. GIMP is a free image processing software. So you're going to reduce the size down 50% because you want to increase the total pixel density of your image. And that may not make a lot of sense to you, but really that is what you want to do. You want to always render at double the final image size. So this is currently set to 1920 by 1080. Put in a 200%. Now let's hit F12 one more time, or you can go up to render image and let's take a look at how this is coming. And you can see that now that it's 2 times the size, yes, it's going to take a lot longer to render out your samples. However, it's going to look a lot sharper and it's going to look a lot cleaner as it is rendering out your final and for your previews. So you can actually see more or less what the final is going to be. So we can zoom in here, leave it rendering for a little bit longer. We'll let it do a few more samples, and then we're going to make a couple really slight adjustments to our overall render settings. So let's let it run for a little bit and then we will pause it. Okay, let's go ahead and hit escape to pause it because it will just keep going until we tell it to stop. And this is what it looks like right now. So it still looks very noisy, but that's okay because we're going to do a couple changes here. So let's minimize this and we're going to go to our render settings and we're going to go. We actually don't want to use light tracing on this. I've done some testing. It doesn't really add a lot. If you want to throw that on, you can. It's up to you. We do want to use the GPU for our final render device, so you want to change that as well, which I didn't do before. But what we want to do is we want to turn on this denoiser. We want to use OIDN and just leave it as its current settings. Then what we want to do is we actually want to clamp some of the values. And if we click this little clamp right here, you can see right here it says set suggested value and it's a super high number. So the clamping, basically what this does is it says to the rendering, don't render anything above this particular threshold. And what we want to do is we don't actually want to use this crazy high number, but we also don't want to use a super low number. If you use like a 1, like a 1.0 or something like that, it's not going to look really nice. It's going to look very dull. Now, Cycles automatically sets this at a 10, but what we're going to do just for the purposes of this particular project, we're going to set this to 50. And we're going to minimize some of those things, and you will generally, what you'll want to do is run a few more test samples and maybe increase your space or grab a particular other area. But we're going to assume that you've already done that. I'm going to change the size of these all the way back up to its original size here. Go into the render or the output properties here. Deselect this crop to render region. Save. And we're going to hit F12. And that's going to re-render our scene. I'm actually going to stop it here because I just remembered one other thing that you'll want to do. So this particular way of rendering is good for previewing your entire scene, but there's one thing that we want to do to increase our render speed. And we want to go down here under light paths. Sorry, not light paths. We want to go to sampling. We're going to turn on pixel filtering, which is going to help with some weird pixel artifacting and stuff like that. Just leave that at a 1.5. That'll work okay. You can reduce this if you want. It'll make it sharper, but we're just going to leave this at a 1.5 for now. Adaptive sampling is going to be on, and you'll just leave that where it is. And what we want to do is change this right here. The pattern, you want to change that to cache friendly. Because this, if you hover over it, it says optimize for faster rendering. And if you turn on progressive and you hover over it, you can see right there, optimize for quick feedback. So let's change this to cache friendly. We're going to save this one more time. And we're going to render that image one more time. And we're going to let this sort of sit. And it's going to render it out all in these small tiles that you'll see populate the entire screen. Okay, so I'm going to stop it right now at this point, and you'll want to keep it going. You'll probably want to have it go until you get a little bit more of this taken care of down here and all that, but we're going to just leave it as is and just trust that you will let it run until this is a little bit less noisy or at least good enough to where you want it to be. Now, I will tell you this. I do have a very fast computer, so if 200% is a little bit too much and your computer takes way too long to render, you can always go in and change it to at least 150%, which will give you a cleaner image. Not as clean as 200, but at least it'll be somewhat cleaner. Okay? So then what we're going to want to do here is, this is cool, but we're going to go into the Compositing tab to do a couple things. So let's click on Use Nodes, and we're going to take a look here. And make sure you have Node Wrangler installed. You just go up here to Edit, Preferences, and you can take a or do a search here under Add-ons. Look for Node Wrangler, and there you go. And basically that's going to help us more easily navigate inside here. So Control Shift left click, and we can basically automatically create a viewer node right here. And you can go up to View, click this Fit button here, and now we are seeing it like this. Now what you can do is you can have your render image open at the same time on another screen or something like that, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like with this just in the background here, okay? So if we Control Shift left click and we go to the denoised, you can see that looks really, really clean. The only problem is there are some areas down here. So if I move this around so you can see it, there are some areas that look a little bit plasticky and fake, and it doesn't really look that good. So I'm going to reset the backdrop here and click Fit. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually take the noisy image, which is a little cleaner, or a little sharper at least, and the denoise, and we're going to mix it together. So Shift A, Color, Mix. I'm going to take the top one for the image here, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see. So top of the mix is that one, then the denoised in the bottom here. Control Shift left click, and we're going to set the factor here to a 0.5. And that's going to give, hopefully, like I said, for you guys, you'll want to have rendered this out so it's a little bit cleaner in here, but it'll give a sort of a little bit of both. It's going to have a more cleaner image with the denoise pass, and it's going to have a little bit more sharpness with our regular image here. And you can change the factor one side to the other, whatever you think is going to really sort of make your image look a bit better as far as a balance between sharpening things up and the denoise here. So what we also want to do is we want to at least have some kind of control over the coloring of our image. So if you go here to Color, and we're going to go to Color Balance, and we can use the top one here as just a test. So if we Control Shift left click at our color balance, you can see here that if I left click and drag, you can actually change the coloring of the entire image by doing this, which is really, really cool. But basically it allows us to change the overall film stock or the color of our image with some post-processing. So if I hold Shift, left click and drag, I can make this look a little bit more vintagey or a little bit more sort of aged by pulling that down in this direction here. And what I can actually do is add a little bit more contrast by pulling this center, the gamma, down a bit, and pulling up the gain, and pulling up the lift. And that's going to add a little bit more contrast to our image, and we can control that by doing this here. So then for this gamma section, if we want, we can add a little bit of blue to this if we wanted to sort of offset some of the orangey yellowish that we did over here. And then for the gain, if you want, you can actually, if I just left click and, go around here, you can see the sort of impact that can have. And you can pull this into different directions to either neutralize colors to make it look very, very black and whitish if you'd like, or you can pull it into a direction to give it a particular feel or tone, like more vintage stock by pulling it down like that, or by cooling things off more by pulling it up into a blue direction up here like that, and then you get a more blue sort of look. So let's go ahead and take our mix here, pipe it into our color balance, and now we have a colorized version of that. And the other thing we can do, if you want, you can go into Filter, Glare, you can throw one of these in, and you can leave it on streaks. And we're going to change this to low, because low I think actually looks a little bit better sometimes when you're doing this. Change the offset to 45 degrees. Modulation, pull this up to maybe 5.26 or a 6.0, and you can see what it's doing back there. And then you'll want to take the mix here, and if you make this a 1, you're just going to be looking at the glow map. And then if you take this to a negative value, you're going to be pulling some of the added glow effects out. So negative, I don't know, 0.95 or something like that. And you can see that there's a little bit of an addition to it. You do see that this is a little bit harsh right in here, and there are ways to mask that out, but I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial. What you could do is you can go back in, change some of your lighting so it doesn't hit that specific area to make this happen, but that's going to be really up to you on going back and doing that. I'm not going to show you how to do that right now. But you can change this to a negative, 0.99, and you can see that there's a little bit of that effect there. And you could take the fade and pull it up as well, which will increase the amount that you can see that shine coming off, or you can pull it down a little bit. You can also change the threshold here. So if we take this mix and we go back to 1 for the glow map, you could take the threshold and put this up to like a 25. So basically anything above a 25 is going to be shown there. And let's take the mix, put it back to 0, and you can see it's way too harsh. Take the mix, negative 0.99. So I've done this quite a few times. That's why I know how to do all this stuff, but I'm just kind of showing you. You could change this to a high setting, but I think low has a really cool effect where it has this fun sort of stepped look to it. And you can also take the iterations here and pop this up as well to make it a little bit more refined. Let's take the threshold. Let's actually pull it down a little bit more. I want a little bit more of these streaks coming through. And let's take the mix and let's maybe go there. That's a little bit too much, 0.945. Whoops, negative 0.945. Maybe something like that'll work. I don't know. It's really up to you at this point to play around with these and get that set where you'd like it to be. And then you can take this, and if you're doing an animation, take this and put it into your composite to make sure that you're actually going to be, when you do your renders, you can pipe it into there so that when it spits out your image, it's actually reading all of the work that you did here. And then for those of you who are just using the viewer, you can go over to the rendering tab, and instead of render result here, just go to the viewer, and you can see that if you change this to the viewer node there, you have your image all ready and set to go. Go to image, save as, then we're going to call this, we're going to take this as a PNG here. I'm going to change this to the name of Lux Ring Toot 01, and then save that as an image, and you are ready to go with sending this out to your client after you reduce the size down 50%. So hopefully that helps you out with rendering out a piece of jewelry inside of LuxCore. Again, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you'd like to, you can become a patron, and I will see you next time on DJ Tutorials.